Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Hello and welcome today to Not Just Ads, the Creator Economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Lena Weber-Reed. Lena is a marketing leader with a number of years' experience in B2B. Currently, she leads marketing in the UK and comms at Getronics. And I'm really excited to talk to her today. Lena, thanks very much for joining us on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. I'm excited.
Great. Maybe we could take a step back and maybe you could just tell me, how did you get into marketing? Was it something that you always had an interest in, or is it something that you kind of fell into, or how did it all come about?
Entirely accidental. I was set on a really academic career. I was halfway through a PhD and decided to quit the whole thing and then didn't know what to do. But I somehow ended up working at the British Library, and I did a range of different jobs there because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, and ended up in PR. And that really kind of set the path for a career in marketing. So from PR, then moved on to social media, and I've spent probably about 15 years in very social media focused roles before now moving into a more generalist marketing role.
Great. Yeah, so it's quite a diverse background as well. What were you doing your PhD in initially?
In comparative literature and how cityscapes inform the creation of self in the modern city novel. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's probably a lot to draw inspiration there from, though, no? In terms of kind of storytelling and things like that sometimes maybe some people would say is missing in marketing now, even in some B2B as well, like that we're very good at like automation and these kind of things, but probably being creative part is maybe some people would say is a bit lacking. Do you see that as well at the moment in B?
Yeah, massively. I think there is a misconception that B2B is very rational and people are led by product or service features. They are led by price and functionality. But really, if you think about it, the B2B buying is so much more emotional. If I buy something and it isn't quite right, I can probably return it, or I'll be annoyed at myself. But if I was to bring in a 6-7 figure vendor for my company and it wasn't working out, I would put my professional reputation on the line. I probably wouldn't do very well at that company, to say the least. So there is so much at stake. It is an incredibly emotional decision, and it is part of our jobs as B2B marketers to kind of de-risk that for the buyer, to make it a safe and clear decision they can defend in front of their buying committee and in front of their C-suite. And that is a creative process, because you're talking about emotions, and you don't talk to emotions or get someone to feel emotionally safe if you're not creative, if you're just showcasing technical details and so on. It doesn't talk to people.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And it's an interesting point you make there about I think some people just assume it's like, you have the different buying committee profiles and then they all meet in a room and they make this like one meeting consensus and they go, yeah, we're going to go with this option. But it never really works like that. It's like what you say, there's risk involved. If somebody makes a wrong call, if they lose face, that can affect their career. There's a lot of other things that are at play.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's an incredibly lengthy process. If I look at the deals that we've closed this year at Getronics, they some of them just for the buying side of the buying cycle. So when they've already been in touch with our sales team, that took a year or longer. People come in and go there. They've had new C-suite brought in and have completely stopped this purchasing process. Maybe there's some reserves or concerns from procurement. So it's an incredibly lengthy process. I wish it was a one-day meeting in a conference room. That would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe you could tell the audience as well a little bit about Getronics. For people that don't know the company, that are unaware, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about Getronics, the category that you operate in, the markets that you're in, and the type of customers that you serve as well?
But we're a global IT services company. We have a really broad portfolio. So we support companies from anything from business applications, cybersecurity, cloud platforms, all the way to the kind of traditional IT outsource like field services, digital workplace, anything like that. We're a global company. So we work across all markets in Europe, Asia. We're growing really strongly in Latin America. We've just recently returned back to the US. So really a kind of global remit. If you've ever taken a plane to Spain and landed on the airport there, you've probably used Getronics technology on there. If you've ever used a credit card in Latin America, you have probably used one of our technology enablers there. So we're a kind of really huge global remit there.
Wow, yeah, it's quite vast as well. Your remit. How many employees roughly, just to give people a
It's about
size?
4,000 employees.
Okay, wow, right,
Yeah.
yeah, so big organization,
Yeah.
yeah. Wow. And then in terms of, because you have a number of different business solutions, so like in terms of categories that you would operate in, then it would be cybersecurity, IT transformation.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because I feel like often as marketers, we limit ourselves to these categories. But for example, we wouldn't perhaps necessarily sit in a category that's relevant, like HR tooling,
Yeah.
but we are more and more, important to HR departments and companies because things like employee onboarding are becoming more and more relevant to companies. Now there is a relevance in the HR sector, if you like.
Yeah.
Yes, we sit predominantly in IT services, but really our solutions kind of apply broadly outside of that.
Right, interesting. And then from a marketing perspective, because I imagine, like what you say, that there's your solution is kind of like touches the lives of different people. Like you mentioned, if you're flying into Spain in the airports or using your credit card in Latin America, from a marketing perspective, I imagine that lands a lot of complexity in terms of like kind of meeting the user or the buyer or the buying committee where they are in the journey and stuff. How do you kind of deal with that then from when you're looking at your role in terms of from marketing, in terms of like how you create demand and so on?
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we look at kind of marketing research over probably last 40 years or so, we know that it's largely a self-driven process. Our buyers research extensively before they even move into getting in touch with a vendor. So this kind of self-discovery process takes many months, maybe years before they will reach out to you. So I see my job as a marketer to make that process as easy and relevant for our buyers as possible. Can they find what they're looking for, which is how do we approach things? We don't have, straightforward out of the box product offerings. That's not what we do. We partner with organizations to kind of drive their IT, their digital transformation. So it's not like a SaaS where I can push people down get a demo button. That is not what we do. So it's more, how can I make this self-discovery journey as easy, as interesting as possible so that people get a sense of trust, a sense of who we are, a sense of who our people are, and then make that decision-making defensible in their buying committee. These guys are the right choice because, and then they get some natural reasons for it. I also think a lot of it is coming back to the emotional side of B2B buying. People want to work with nice people. If you're onboarding a services company, showcasing who we are and how great my colleagues are who deliver the services is a really important part.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it. I guess that works really well if you have kind of like endorsements from previous clients, testimonials, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you can showcase that you are the go-to provider in a specific category, obviously makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think some of the companies like obviously not they're in a different area, but I think some of the ones like Amazon, that they're very completely focused on the customer, and they're like anyone that you talk to that works in Amazon, they have like the extra chair in the meeting room for the customer and so on, customer centricity. And it's interesting because you mentioned it, because sometimes I think that you need all this information and you need all these things, but actually when you go and talk to customers, you get a wealth of information there that sometimes that's overlooked. And when you ask certain people like simple questions like that they the customer sometimes has the answers to them. That some marketers I've talked to in the past, they mention that, but they say that as a marketing org, sometimes it's like that disconnect can be there. Do you see that sometimes in terms of the feedback that gets from customers? The larger the organization, maybe the more difficult it can be to implement into workflows and so on.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I've worked for Fortune 100 companies where I'm sure no one in the marketing department ever spoke to a customer. It was just too siloed, too big of
Yeah,
an organization where marketing is too removed from the local markets. I'm lucky that at Getronics, this is really different. And I work very closely with my sales team, and I have customer access as much as I like, more or less.
yeah.
I can really kind of get that feedback and understand what motivates their buying. What are their actual problems? I'm not an IT expert. I don't understand the technical side of it, which is often actually quite
Yeah.
helpful, because this is, as I said, the decision making isn't really driven so much by the technical detailing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you say, because I guess sometimes people that are really knowledgeable about the technical implementation, sometimes it can be difficult then to be very brief and clear in terms of how you communicate what actually is the need and the solution that you're trying to solve. Whereas from a marketer's standpoint, you can do that much more easier to the audience, because you're thinking of what the customer is, or their kind of pain points and so on.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd always recommend having almost like a two-track content strategy, where you have the technical content, because there are technical people on the buying committee who do really want to know what is your solutioning from a technical perspective, and they find that interesting and relevant. But then you increasingly have people from outside, in our case, the IT organization. You have CEOs, people from finance, from legal, maybe from procurement on this buying committee, who, like me, don't have that in-depth technical understanding. And they need to have, and they want to have, entirely different information.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, like, if you're looking at how marketing is kind of slightly changing now in B2B? Because I guess there's always the trends of, like, if we were talking 10 years ago, it's the white paper and it's the piece of research. And I think in certain sectors that's still probably important now, like in pharma, B2B and certain segments. You can't just dismiss it completely. But some people say now it's like kind of there was the gated content. Now it's like open everything. And it's the kind of founder-led voice, or the C-level voice, or the trust, and people that kind of have a much more allegiance to someone like that's a trusted voice or a subject matter expert in a field. What do you think in terms of, when you look at your role, what's like some of the big changes you've seen over the last, say, 24 months when it comes to B2B marketing?
Coming back to the kind of white paper, I wouldn't dismiss it. I think it's
Yep.
the quality, the biggest change is probably the quality of content. I think there has been a lot of AI-driven content creation that has kind of really lowered the standard. I see things that people give away as gated content
Yep.
that is just a 10-pager they downloaded
Yep.
straight from ChatGPT. There's no value
Yep.
in it, and it's never going to convert, let's be honest
Yep.
about that. And in the same way, people are clearly driving their employee advocacy through ChatGPT, where they share
Yep.
posts that are really, not of value. So it's kind of, I think the channel isn't important. It's the content and the value,
Yeah.
the genuine value that you're offering. I would say that's the kind of biggest change in that. We actually do quite a lot of consumer research, because we want to understand where our buyers are, what their kind of end consumers think, and what they think of the technology our partners should be implementing. And that's worked really well for us to kind of do these in-depth consumer studies, so that we can go to our partners, say in the travel transport sector, and go, we've spent some money on this. There is some generally interesting consumer research. These are the things that they want. Let's sit down together and discuss that. That's been a really good example of marketing that's been working for us over the last year. I think the social selling, or the C-suite employer advocacy can work. I think this is very much, for me, this is very much a SaaS play, where you often
Yeah.
have the founder as the voice. Getronics is a company that's 130, 140 years old. There's no founder voice, if you like. Obviously, we
Yeah,
have
I
a
know what you mean.
fantastic CEO, whose voice is absolutely worth listening to. But there's a difference to a SaaS founder kind of talks about the founding journey and the mission. And the vision is slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point you make in terms of because the the, the trend at the moment is like the founder voice and the building in public. That does get a lot of engagement, but I would say over the last probably 6 months or so, there is a bit of noise there as well, and it's becoming more noise than it is just like how you can stand out. But I'd love to get a little bit more from your input in terms of what you mentioned about the white paper, because I think it's really interesting of like actually sitting down and doing some research and then going from a marketing standpoint of getting like input from your clients. What way do you normally do that then? Is it like you have kind of say particular pain points or topics or even category entry points, for want of a better word, and you go then to your particular like kind of say partners, existing, current or future, and you kind of have like, okay, these are the themes that we're going to do, that we've run research on or that we're going to do research on, and then you kind of present the findings to them, kind of enabling the sales team. Is that kind of the play, or is it something different?
Yes and no. So we've done what you described, but usually what we do is we kind of go and find a sector where we're already developing some interesting partnerships and relationships. And it's interesting for us to understand what the end user wants from their IT experience, the
Yep.
end user experience as the kind of driver of business transformation where we can partner up with. And so, for example, we've gone out and we did an airport trust survey where we surveyed people across the UK to see what do they think about data safety at airports. Are they happy to just scan their face and walk through a
Yeah.
gate? Do they even think about that? That is data that is then becomes accessible by third parties potentially. So we did this survey, and that was super interesting because we could go to our airport partners in the UK and say, look, here's some consumer research put in not just about airports in general, but about your particular airport and what they think and how they experience that technology. Let's talk about it. So
Yeah.
it's just really valuable information that, yeah, we can press release and it will get us some PR, but it's also a tool for my sales colleagues to kind of reach out and say, we've had some interesting insights. Should we have a meeting? Should we discuss this?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing as well of what you say, like when it's specific to the airport and you have the data there, that's nearly like, okay, right, that's kind of leading into the brand equity of like how
Yeah.
people think about it. So you're talking about something that's not just from a marketing standpoint, but it's also from like a financial standpoint down the line. If they see that being an issue or something, it's definitely a way that's going to get people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. This has worked really well for us, but we've also spent, you mentioned category entry points before, and we've also spent quite a lot of time to kind of sitting down, talking across sales, pre-sales, solution architecture, to kind of think about what is it that triggers a company to kind of go, we can't handle this IT issue anymore. We need to outsource. We need to go and find
Yeah.
a partner. And then we've created marketing campaigns and content and thought leadership pieces around these specific category entry points, which then
And
kind of talk more closely to or kind of trigger that emotive thinking.
yeah, when you run those, then is it normally through like the typical channels, no, like paid amplification, or is it very targeted of like specific type of companies, or both?
Both. So I think going broad always works better than going incredibly niche. But yeah, I usually run targeted campaigns by industry vertical. For us, we have salespeople then attached to that industry vertical.
Yeah,
Um, and then I work with them to then kind of get this feedback loop of what do you know about this industry? What kind of feedback are you getting? So it's a constantly changing, evolving process.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's something that's it's quite broad from what you say, the type of sectors that you're in as well, and things change, things evolve. Like if you have something like COVID, or hopefully we won't have that again in our lifetime, but how things change so much in that space of time, and how companies approach things and everything like that, depending on the sector, I think it's an exciting space to be in. I'd love to get a from your perspective, around kind of like the marketing and sales alignment piece. And that's always a challenge for people, like the how actually sales, they see work together with marketing. I think the bigger the organization, the bigger the struggle with silos and stuff. But from your perspective, how do you see that in terms of like how your role and how you work with sales? what challenges or what do you think works well or what could work better?
I think you need to look at it from the customer perspective. If you're buying from Getronics, you don't, as a customer, think, well, I have now gone through the awareness marketing
Yeah.
piece. Now comes the handover to sales. That's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
how people buy
No.
at all.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
them, it's a seamless experience with a brand. That is what I need to deliver. That's what my sales colleagues want to deliver to them. So, to have that really close partnership is a complete no-brainer for me, not just marketing and sales, but also what happens in pre-sales and architecture during RFPs. What happens then when they become a customer? How is the CX experience? All of that is just brand experience and how someone experiences you. And all of that needs to work together because these are all data points that then kind of inform each other and give you insight into what that experience is like and what you can improve. I agree with what you said before, that it's the bigger the organization, bigger the gap between marketing
Yeah.
and sales. I'm really lucky that at Getronics it's not like that. And I talk to my sales team all the time, every day, and we're very much aligned in what we do. I think a lot of salespeople have kind of been burned by marketers feeding them shoddy MQLs that are just, downloads or
Yeah.
a Zoom info list that, they don't want to have to deal with that. I think being honest with your sales colleagues and kind of accepting that they don't want to deal with leads that aren't really leads is also part of it. And that is how you build that relationship and the internal trust within your organization.
Yeah, that actually leads me on to my next question and I saw a post. I think it's probably maybe a couple of months old, but you were talking about like the change from like kind of demand. I know we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'd love to get more of your insight on it, of like kind of the demand generation versus the demand creation, and kind of like from a financial point of view of like, the way some companies before, it was like, okay, you're in marketing, so we need these amount of leads. And now it's more like it's an education piece. How are you going to educate the buyer in terms of like when they're in that discovery phase, and you're partnering with sales in order to do that? But how do you see it from when you actually then see like from marketing as a whole, of like how they justify, or do you find that there's pressure to trying to justify marketing's contribution to that kind of sales outcome? Or is it something like it's actually shared? Like once they hit their goals, then you're seen as the enabler.
I think it's really different from organization to organization. I've worked in organizations
Yeah.
that had almost like a last touch attribution, where it was a constant fight between marketing and sales. It's like,
Yeah.
who did the final thing,
Yeah.
instead of kind of stepping back and thinking, during a
Both on the
buyer
same team.
journey, you
Yeah.
have 300 touch points. Does it
Exactly.
really matter?
Yeah.
No, you
Exactly.
got this
Yeah.
client. Let's move on.
Yeah.
I think that setup and that competition between sales and marketing can still be there. I think in general it might be changing, because that kind of demand gen piece, or the growth hacking of 5-10 years ago, it
Yeah.
clearly isn't working.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I think as well that leads me on to my next question in terms of how you see like platforms evolving. I saw your post earlier on today about like the comparison with LinkedIn and Spotify. I liked it a lot. It's true, but like from your perspective, how do you see like kind of say different platforms and how they've evolved from a marketing standpoint? And feel free to be as candid as you like in terms of like how you see it there. Because every I think if you look traditionally, every platform kind of has this kind of what would I say? Initially, they start and it's like maybe there's not much content there, so people kind of see that there's huge kind of reach. Then they evolve, then it's kind of ads, and then it kind of matures and so on. But from your perspective for B2B, how like when you look at certain platforms, how do you see them from a marketing perspective evolving, and what do you see like any platforms you're excited about in the future or anything like that?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said about the kind of the cycle of a social media platform. You get loads of reach, loads of engagement, you can build a community really quickly, and then they cash in and start to monetize, and you have to pay to play on
Yeah.
anything. I think that's exactly what we're seeing on LinkedIn right now. It's no coincidence that the reach has gone down on organic, because you can now boost your
Yeah.
personal posts.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a correlation between the two. I think there are some really exciting, for me as a social media marketer predominantly, there's some amazing platforms. I love TikTok. I know everyone hates it. I absolutely love it. And I think it's a huge opportunity for B2B, because there's this misconception that you have to be on a professional platform like LinkedIn to reach your buyers. People don't think of social media like that. Social media is there to entertain, past 5 minutes while you've got, you're waiting for the kettle to boil or something, you just quickly go and scroll somewhere. Your buyers in most categories will be on across a range of social media platforms. Why not reach them on there?
Yeah.
What prevents you as a B2B platform to be on TikTok and to be entertaining there? Is, we don't have a business brain that we turn off at 5 p.m. and then I get my personal brain on, and then I go on social, and that's not how humans interact with the world and social media at all. And I think there are some amazing B2B companies on there on TikTok who are doing a fantastic job and building the community and kind of tapping into the opportunity that is on TikTok right now, where you get a lot of reach. It's easy to build a community. I'm sure it'll change in the future, but right now it's a good time to be active on there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with TikTok, it's so broad that when they launched, we're just able to go across so many different verticals of like traditional B2C, but also there's still a lot of growth in niches that, like B2B, for example, and even niches within B2B that people see that there's still, you know what I mean, so much. And I suppose the format as well, in terms of like video first. I know LinkedIn are moving in that direction of video first, but TikTok is like pure video first. So it's the format, the consumption of the content, it's easy to consume. I think for marketers, I don't know how you find this, but I worked ads probably 4 years ago now in TikTok, and one of the challenges that people had was they had to look at TikTok as a different channel in terms of, from a marketing standpoint, of like, okay, we know that there's an audience here, we know that we get a lot of reach, but how do we make videos just for TikTok that are different to Instagram? And sometimes people overthink it as well. I don't know how you found that from Getronics as well. If you've run videos there of like how you would kind of position the content there versus in other platforms?
We have not been running videos on there for now, but TikTok is pure entertainment and it's incredibly trend-led. If you want to be relevant on TikTok, my starting point would always be to kind of go on TikTok trends and understand what are people seeing right now, what they're searching for, what kind of sounds that they're using, what kind of hashtags are relevant, and then build your content around that. But obviously make it relevant to who you are. And, I think there's a misconception that this is all Gen Z or, maybe young millennials, but that isn't true. I'm 45. I'm on TikTok every day. There's a lot of people on there who are on your buying committees. Why not reach them on there?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great platform. And I think now as well, what's really interesting is how they're kind of controlling the distribution with TikTok Shop and TikTok Live.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's an incredible company, and the organization as well. Excuse me. I'd love to get some of your predictions for the future. One thing I might ask you before your predictions, though, is around B2B creators and your opinion. Excuse me. Is it something you see as a fad, or do you think that this is something that could be around for another couple of years? Or what's your opinion about it? If you've come across creators, or if you've experienced it in B2B. Excuse me.
I think creators have been there since the beginning of communities on the internet. You had creators on MySpace, you had creators on Tumblr. Every platform will have creators who will be there, and it will be their main job, their profession, to kind of create content on there. I think, if anything, in B2B, that is in its infancy. I have a lot of B2C colleagues who spend 80% of their marketing budget purely on creator-led sales, and that is their revenue driver. I think we're probably 5 years behind that in B2B. I think it's absolutely going to be relevant because people want to buy from other people. They, if you have creators who you can kind of affiliate with your brand, I don't think a one-off creator relationship is ever going to work in B2B, because that isn't relevant to a long-term buying cycle. But if you can form a long-term and a genuine partnership with a B2B creator, I think this can be an incredibly well-used asset to your marketing mix, to use their channel. Because let's be honest, on LinkedIn, a company page gets barely any reach unless you pay for it. So using a creator and tapping into their community is a smart move.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. One of the other interesting things I was looking at as well is the research around like getting recommended on LLMs now. They're saying that there's like it's one of the components is around like the authority piece. So it's like kind of, are other people talking about you? And that kind of plays into the creator piece as well, because if you have a creator talking about your brand or service, then the likelihood of appearing in an LLM is that bit higher as well. So yeah, I think at least from what I can see, I think it depends on the vertical as well. I know, like say financial services, some of these regulated industries maybe are more cautious, but I think there's other areas in B2B, it's definitely working really well.
Agree. And a creator doesn't necessarily have to be someone from outside of your organizations too. I see this at Getronics, where we have a couple of people who have really big social media followings that people naturally love posting on LinkedIn. They love engaging. They have communities that are close to or overlap with our target audiences. These are also creators that you
Yep.
can use and tap into for your kind of brand awareness and brand reach.
Yeah. What are any other predictions that you have in the B2B space from what you see over the next few years? What
I
do you
think
think?
there's going to be a massive AI fatigue,
Yeah.
because at the moment I see AI used in marketing, not very strategic.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you kind of, we're using AI exactly where I wouldn't use it at all, where it kind of
Yeah.
substitutes the creative process and that kind of the human relationship building. I would love to see AI being used where it does really good work, where on data, essentially.
Yeah.
This is what I'd love to see. Predictive AI, more throw in your entire customer lifecycle data from marketing awareness to, I don't know, churn out, chuck it all in and then run some predictive modeling. That I would love to see. If that's happening in the future, I'll be happy. But I do think that there will come a point, and I think that maybe we're already at the start of this, where people are just tired of seeing this churn and the sameness,
Yeah.
the boringness. It's so beige. So much of marketing right now is incredibly dull.
Yeah. It's I think there's I guess there's like a different trails of thought in terms of like the go to market kind of. You've probably seen these kind of companies that are very much focused on like automation and ad stack, and you see the comment gating then of like, hey, I just generated 50 meetings for the next month and
Yeah.
I didn't have to spend anything on paid ads, and you can get my playbook here and you just comment below. And the website is never referenced or anything. It's usually like somebody to generate leads. I understand what they're trying to do, but I think it's kind of a definition in a way of like the difference, I suppose, between something that's like kind of very analytical versus actually something that's kind of very creative, that stands out, that gets a message across. And probably since a lot of like digital marketing online, I suppose, I think it was Rory Sutherland that mentioned the quote was like kind of that creative marketing was not as scalable as like kind of data driven marketing. But as a result, now we've reached this kind of scale of boringness. And I think there's a lot of truth in what he says about that.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. AI is fundamentally brilliant at reading data. That is where you deploy it. And I understand that a lot of organizations can't, because their data sits in silos across different, I don't know, Excel spreadsheets or CRM systems. But this is where you would really see the value. If you can kind of overcome that, the data fragmentation, that is where I put AI. And that is what's going to drive it. And then have a human interpret these data points. These data points in marketing are human behavior.
Yeah, I was listening to the CEO of Eli Lilly, the pharma company, and he was talking about how like he doesn't come from a science background, but they have to make 4 big decisions every year, so like once a quarter. And he was saying that he uses Claude a lot for like a lot of scientific research and stuff. Claude, I think, I can't remember. Oh, and the AI of X, I can't remember what it's called, but it was interesting what he was saying, because he was kind of like, yeah, we use it for like kind of like science papers and stuff, but we always have to check what the sources are. but before, just purely for time, it can create these kind of like documentation on science research, but then obviously you need a human to go through it. So I think there's good use case there, because that's not really on content. It's more something on just purely on a research basis.
Mm-hmm.
But I think using it just outsourcing as creative, it's definitely very apparent that it doesn't really have the same capabilities, even though some people would argue that it does. Yeah, it's maybe they'll improve, but I don't really want to see it that it's going to improve in terms of that we all just kind of sound the same and everything is very bland. That'd be quite a boring world.
It would be incredibly boring.
Yeah. Just before we finish up then, so Getronics, what's happening in terms of the next, say, 6 to 18 months? Anything, events, anything that the audience would be interested in, whether it's events or something new, any releases or anything like that that would be notable to mention?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, I mentioned the consumer research we do. We've got a new consumer research study into bus travel coming up, and that we're going to press release in the next few weeks. So some really interesting insights into how Brits across the UK are using bus and what prevents them from using bus, what kind of technology they would want to see that would get them using buses more frequently. That's one thing that's coming up. For the next year, I'm mainly focusing on much smaller, bespoke CIO community events. We really want to bring people from across sectors together so that they can brainstorm and discuss their ideas. We've got a couple of interesting webinars coming up that you'll be finding on our website. Like we're having a discussion around, is outsourcing actually dead or not? It's a spoiler, it's not. It's just moving into a much more value-based model where it's no longer good enough to kind of tick off your tickets and that looks green, whereas your end user, your customer experience is really poor. That is the real driver of digital transformation right now. So there's a couple of points. If you want to find out, just follow me on LinkedIn. I usually share everything on there.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll leave your details on the show notes as well. Lena, it was great talking with you. Thanks very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you.